I wasn't looking for a life-changing experience when I took the job on the ranch. Honestly, I was just broke. After getting laid off from a dead-end office job in the city and watching my savings drain faster than my will to respond to rejection emails, I hit a point where I just needed something. Anything. A break. A shift. A way to hit reset. That's when I saw the post, ranch hand needed. Housing provided. It sounded like a Craigslist scam at first, but it was real. Somewhere out in the middle of Texas hill country, a ranch needed a guy to muck stalls, fix fences, and haul hay bales. Not glamorous, not my skill set, but I didn't care. I applied. Got a call back 2 days later. 3 days after that, I was loading my stuff into a secondhand truck and driving west. The ranch was massive, miles of open fields, long dirt roads, and fences stretching into forever. The main house stood like something out of a Western movie, weathered wood and a big wraparound porch. There were a few barns, a bunkhouse, some cattle pens, and beyond that, nothing but land and sky. That's where I met Luke, the foreman. He was standing near the stables when I pulled in, wiping his hands on a rag and squinting into the sun. He looked like every cowboy stereotype you'd expect. Tall, broad-shouldered, worn jeans, scuffed boots, a dust-stained shirt rolled up at the sleeves. He didn't smile when he saw me, but he gave me a nod, and that was apparently the welcome. "You the new guy?" he asked, voice low and rough around the edges. "Yeah. Jordan?" I said, stepping out and offering my hand. He shook it, firm and no nonsense. "Luke. Hope you're not allergic to dirt, sweat, or horse shit." I forced a laugh. "Guess I'll find out." Luke didn't strike me as friendly, at least not in the way people in cities try to be. But there was something about him. Calm, solid, like he'd never once doubted who he was or what he was doing. He gave me the tour, pointed out where I'd be sleeping in the bunkhouse, what time breakfast was, and what tools I'd need. That night, lying on the thin bunk mattress, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the hard bed or the crickets outside, but because something about this place felt different. Like I was right on the edge of something. I just didn't know what. The first week was brutal. Early mornings, manual labor, sunburns in places I didn't know could burn. Luke didn't talk much, but he watched. Closely. Always with those cool gray eyes that felt like they could read your thoughts if you stared too long. He worked harder than all of us. Always one step ahead. Never asking more than he was willing to do himself. He wasn't mean, but he didn't baby anyone either. If you messed up, he let you know. If you did good work, he gave you a nod. That was about it. But every so often, there were these moments. Like the time I tripped carrying a heavy bale and scraped up my arm. Luke was on me in seconds, crouched beside me, inspecting the wound with a touch that was way gentler than I expected. His fingers brushed against my skin, and for half a second, he just looked at me. Like, really looked. "You all right?" he asked, but his voice was lower. Slower. "Yeah," I muttered, just embarrassed. He didn't laugh. Just gave the tiniest smirk, stood up and said, "Get cleaned up. You're bleeding on my hay." Later, I caught him looking at me again across the barn like he was trying to figure something out. But when our eyes met, he turned away. I thought maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I was desperate for connection or just bored. But something about Luke got under my skin. And then there was that night. We had just finished a long day, mending a fence that some wild hogs had busted through. It was late. Most of the guys had gone to bed. I stayed behind in the barn, stalling, pretending to finish sweeping, trying to stretch out the evening for no real reason. Luke walked in, still dirty from the day, shirt damp with sweat, hair messy under his hat. He leaned against the stall door and watched me. "You ever done this kind of work before?" he asked. I shook my head. City boy through and through. Could have fooled me. You don't complain. I looked at him, unsure what to say. "You don't seem like the kind of guy who cares about complaining." He smirked again, just barely. "I don't." Then silence. Just the sound of horses shifting in their stalls, and some low country music playing faintly from the radio someone left on. "You sticking around?" he asked suddenly, not looking at me. "What do you mean?" Most new guys don't last more than 2 weeks. Too hot, too hard, too quiet. But you seem like you're built for quiet. I swallowed, not sure how to respond to that. There was something in his tone. Something that felt less like small talk and more like something else. He pushed off the stall and stepped toward me, close enough that I could smell the dust and sweat and leather on him, close enough to see a nick on his jaw where he must have cut himself shaving that morning. "Can I offer you something?" he asked. I blinked. "Like, what?" He stepped closer. "Something most guys don't ask for. But I've seen the way you look at me when you think I'm not watching." I froze. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even smug. Just calm. Real. Like he'd made peace with this moment long before I even knew it was coming. "You don't have to say yes," he said. "But I thought I'd offer." I couldn't breathe. He wasn't bluffing. He meant it. And the worst or best part, I didn't want to say no. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. Luke was standing inches from me, calm as ever, while my heart jackhammered inside my chest like I just sprinted 5 miles. There was no smirk, no teasing glint in his eyes, just quiet intensity, a kind of waiting, like he wasn't surprised by the silence, like he expected it. I swallowed. "What exactly are you offering?" His eyes didn't flinch. "You tell me." That answer could have meant anything. And everything. And it left me spinning. But something about the way he said it, the way he didn't lean in or make a move, gave me a strange sense of control. He was testing the water, not pushing me in. "I don't usually—" I started, then stopped, embarrassed by how unsteady my voice sounded. Luke tilted his head slightly. "Neither do I." We stood there for what felt like forever. Then he backed off, just a step. "Long day, you should get some rest." And just like that, he walked out. No pressure, no weirdness, just gone. But I didn't sleep. I lay in my bunk staring at the ceiling fan, replaying the moment over and over. The way his voice dropped, the way his eyes had flicked down to my lips just once, the way it wasn't a joke. And how he hadn't been drunk or careless. He knew exactly what he was doing. The next morning, everything was back to normal. Sort of. Luke was out by the corral before sunrise, barking orders, tossing hay bales like they weighed nothing. He didn't avoid me, didn't even act different. But when I caught him watching me across the pen, he didn't look away. That glance said more than any words could have. A few days passed. We worked side by side like always. Dirty hands, sunburnt necks, sweat staining our clothes. I was getting stronger. The work wasn't as miserable anymore. I started enjoying the rhythm, the ache in my muscles at night, the quiet conversations at lunch, the way Luke's dry sense of humor would sneak out when you least expected it. One evening, we were fixing a busted fence about a mile from the main house. Just the two of us. The sun was low, throwing long shadows across the field. We were both sweaty and dusty, kneeling in tall grass, wrestling with a stubborn post. "Damn thing won't hold," I muttered, yanking the wire tighter. Luke stood up, wiped his brow with his forearm, then offered a hand. "Let me." When I gave him the pliers, our fingers touched. It wasn't anything, really. But it lingered. Or maybe I let it. "You ever worked with your hands before this?" he asked, adjusting the tension on the wire. "Not like this," I admitted. "Used to sit behind a desk. Thought I'd die of boredom," he smirked. "City boys don't usually last out here. Guess I'm not like most city boys." He paused, looked right at me. "No," he said. "You're not." There was silence. No wind, no birds. Just that sentence hanging between us. When we got back to the barn, the other guys were gone. Dinner had come and gone while we were still working. I grabbed a bottle of water from the cooler and leaned against the wall, too tired to move. Luke sat down a few feet away, pulling off his boots with a grunt. "You ever think about staying on?" he asked suddenly. "Like, full-time?" He nodded. "Ranch needs good hands. And you're good." I blinked. I wasn't expecting that. "I don't know," I said. "Didn't think I was the ranch type." "You are," he said without hesitation. "You just don't know it yet." It was quiet again, The kind of quiet that feels thick, charged. Not uncomfortable, but not empty either. Luke stood, walked over to the corner where the tack room was, then looked back at me. You coming? Where? He didn't answer, just tilted his head and disappeared inside. I hesitated, heart pounding again for reasons I didn't want to analyze. Then I followed. The tack room was cooler than the rest of the barn. Dimly lit, smelled like leather, oil, and hay. Luke was standing with his back to me, sorting through a shelf. When he turned, he was holding a bottle of whiskey. You drink? He asked. Sometimes. He uncapped it, took a swig, and handed it over. I hesitated, then took a sip. Burned on the way down, warmed my chest. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching me again. So, what? You gonna keep pretending I didn't offer? I stared at him. You serious about that? He nodded once. I don't say things I don't mean. Why me? His answer came slow, measured. Because you don't belong here, and somehow you still fit. I didn't know what to say to that, so I took another sip. He stepped closer. We were inches apart again. Still curious? He asked. I didn't answer. I didn't have to. He reached out, slow, giving me time to flinch or pull away. I didn't. His fingers brushed the edge of my jaw, calloused and careful. His thumb lingered near my mouth. The way he looked at me then, like I was something rare, something fragile and wild, knocked the air out of my lungs. And when he leaned in, I didn't stop him. When Luke kissed me, it wasn't rushed or messy or filled with pent-up tension like I'd imagined it would be during those long, silent nights in the bunkhouse. It was slow, intentional. His lips were warm, tasting faintly of whiskey and dust, and for a moment, I didn't kiss him back. I just stood there, stunned by the softness of it, the way his hand stayed at my jaw like he was afraid of pushing too far. But then, my body caught up with my mind, and I leaned in. It wasn't frantic. It wasn't even about intimacy. It was something else, something I didn't have words for at the time. When he finally pulled back, he searched my face like he was waiting for me to say something. I didn't. I couldn't. My heart was hammering, and my mouth had gone completely dry. Luke took a half step back, but he didn't look embarrassed or nervous. If anything, he looked relieved. I figured if I didn't make a move soon, you'd leave here not knowing, he said quietly. Knowing what? He shrugged one shoulder. That you weren't the only one looking. That sentence, it did something to me, because it meant I hadn't been imagining things. All those glances, the careful silences, the way he always seemed to be watching me when no one else was. It was real. He'd felt it too. I sat down on the small wooden bench in the tack room, suddenly unsteady. Luke handed me the bottle again, and I took another drink to calm the storm going on in my chest. You all right? He asked, voice quieter now. Yeah, just surprised. He gave a small smile. Not a habit of mine. I didn't think it was. Not the type to chase feelings, he said. Usually easier to ignore them. Why didn't you ignore this? Luke looked at me then, and for the first time since I met him, I saw something crack in his expression. Not vulnerability exactly, more like honesty. Because you walked onto my land and didn't flinch at the work, or the heat, or the silence. You didn't try to be something you weren't. And every day, I kept waiting for you to quit. But you didn't. You stayed. And then I caught myself wanting to keep you here. That hit me somewhere deep. No one had ever said something like that to me. Not in that way. Not with so few words and so much weight behind them. Luke. He stepped closer again, this time slowly enough that I could stop him if I wanted to. I didn't. You don't have to say anything, he murmured. Hell, I don't even know what this is. Just wanted you to know I see you, that's all. He turned to go then, like he'd said what he needed to and didn't expect anything in return. But before he could reach the door, I grabbed his wrist. Wait. He stopped. I stood up, heart in my throat. You said most new guys don't last more than 2 weeks. Yeah. Well, I've made it almost 4. Luke's eyes narrowed just slightly. That's supposed to mean something? I nodded, my voice low. It means I'm not going anywhere. Not yet. Something shifted between us then. Some kind of unspoken agreement. We weren't rushing into anything. There were no labels or plans or promises. Just this moment. Just us. And whatever the hell was building between two men who never expected to find it here. The next morning, nothing was different. Not on the outside anyway. We still worked the pens. Still hauled feed. Still gave the new calf its shots and patched the fence near the east ridge. But the way Luke looked at me when no one was watching, that was different. The way he lingered a little longer when we passed each other. The way he brushed against me just slightly when we loaded tools into the back of the truck. It was quiet. Subtle. But it was there. Later that week, a storm rolled in. Fast. One of those late summer thunderheads that dropped the temperature by 10 degrees in minutes and sent the whole crew scrambling to secure tarps and herd the cattle in. We got soaked. Head to toe. By the time we got back to the barn, we were dripping. Clothes plastered to our bodies, mud everywhere. The other guys headed to the bunkhouse, grumbling about wet boots and soggy dinners. I stayed behind to help Luke shut the barn doors. When the last one was latched, he turned to me, water dripping from the brim of his hat, his shirt half clinging to his chest. "Thanks for staying," he said. "I don't mind the rain," I replied. "I know." We stood there for a minute, both of us shivering slightly in the cool breeze that followed the storm. Then, without a word, he stepped closer, raised his hand, and brushed a piece of wet hair from my forehead. The touch was quick, almost nothing, but my body reacted like he'd lit a fuse under my skin. I reached for him this time. It wasn't a kiss this time. It was a pull. A silent understanding. His arms around me, my hands at his waist, and the thunder rumbling low in the background as the sky cracked open again. I didn't care if anyone saw. I didn't care what this meant yet. I just knew that for the first time in a long, long time, I felt something real. After that night in the barn, things shifted between Luke and me, again. It wasn't dramatic. There were no confessions under moonlight, or sudden changes in how we acted around the others. If anything, we got better at hiding it, more careful. But in private, when no one was looking, it was like we couldn't help ourselves. A brush of his hand on my lower back when we passed in the tack room. The way he'd linger just a second too long beside me at the water trough. And every night, after the ranch had gone quiet and the lights in the bunkhouse were off, I'd find myself wide awake, thinking about him. About what we were doing. About what it could become, because I knew better than to assume anything. This was a man who lived his life in silence, who never said more than he needed to, who spent more time with horses and land than people. I didn't even know if Luke had ever done something like this before. Hell, I didn't even know if I had. And yet, every time we ended up alone, I didn't want to leave. One Saturday evening, 2 weeks after the storm, Luke invited me to his cabin. It was the small one tucked behind the horse paddock, separate from the bunkhouse and the main house. I hadn't been inside before. Most of the guys joked about how Luke never let anyone in, said it was his sanctuary. So when he told me to come by after dinner, my stomach twisted in anticipation. It was warm inside, clean, but lived in. Wood-paneled walls, a beat-up leather armchair in the corner, an old coffee mug on the windowsill. It smelled like cedar and coffee and leather. Like him. "Didn't know you lived like a hermit," I joked, glancing around. Luke smirked, handing me a cold beer. "It's quiet. That's the point." I took the bottle, but didn't drink. "Why me, Luke?" He didn't flinch, just sat on the edge of the kitchen counter, arms crossed over his chest. "You ever meet someone," he said slowly, "and they just fit? Even when they shouldn't?" I stared at him, the beer sweating in my hand. "Yeah, I have. Thought I could ignore it at first," he continued. "Tell myself it was just something passing. Just another guy working a summer job. But then you started staying late. Started looking at me like you saw more than just the boots in the dirt. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. He looked up, eyes softer now. And the more I saw you out there, working through the blisters and the heat, not trying to impress anyone, the harder it got to pretend. I stepped closer. I wasn't trying to impress anyone, I said. I know. Luke reached out, hand finding the hem of my shirt and tugging slightly, grounding me. The air between us felt heavy again, but not in a bad way. Charged, like we were both tiptoeing on the edge of something neither of us had planned for. I don't know where this goes, I admitted. Neither do I, he replied, but I'm not asking for forever. What are you asking for? He held my gaze. Tonight. That was all it took. We didn't rush. It wasn't frantic or messy or overly dramatic. It was slow, careful. Two men figuring out what the hell this was while barely saying a word. Later, as we lay on his narrow bed, the window cracked open to the sound of crickets and distant thunder. Luke ran his fingers down my arm, his voice low and steady. You scared? I turned toward him. Not of you. He nodded. Good. That night, I slept better than I had in years. And after that, I kept going back. Not every night. Sometimes days would pass where we didn't speak outside of work, where we barely looked at each other in front of the other hands. But then the evening would come, the stars would come out, and one of us would find the other. It became a rhythm, a secret, ours. And yet, the longer it went on, the more I felt that familiar weight pressing down on me. Not because of shame or guilt, but because I didn't know how long it could last. One night, after a long day moving cattle, we sat outside his cabin, sharing a beer, boots propped on the railing. You ever think about what happens when the season ends? I asked, barely above a whisper. Luke was quiet for a long time. Then, yeah, and? I don't know. That's not an answer. I know. I turned to him. You want me to stay? Luke didn't move, just stared out at the stars. If I say yes, you won't hold it against me when this gets complicated? I let the silence stretch before replying. Luke, it's already complicated. He finally looked at me. I don't want you to go. And just like that, everything changed again. After that night on the porch, nothing and everything changed. We didn't say it out loud, but something settled between us. Something real. Luke had finally admitted what I think we both knew weeks ago. He didn't want me to leave. And I didn't want to go either. But that didn't mean it was easy. Life on the ranch kept moving, just as it always did. The cows still needed feeding. The fences still needed fixing. And Luke was still the foreman. Stoic, quiet, respected. To the other hands, he was the same man he'd always been. But to me, in private, behind closed doors, or under the stars, he was something else. He was warm, he was open. He was mine. And still, we couldn't let anyone else know. Not because the ranch was full of bigots or anything like that. It was more complicated. Luke had worked here for years. He'd earned his respect, his space, his peace. The idea of upending that, of making things awkward with the rest of the crew, wasn't just uncomfortable. It was dangerous for him. And for me, so we kept it quiet. We played the game, but every now and then, something would slip, like the way he'd glance at me across the barn when he thought no one was watching, or how he'd take the long way around just to pass by me during lunch, or the way I started lingering by his cabin even when I didn't mean to. The crew started teasing me for it. You got a man crush on the boss or something? One of them joked one evening when I showed up late to a card game. I laughed it off. Yeah, I just can't get enough of that grumpy face. They all laughed, but Luke, standing off to the side stacking feed, didn't crack a smile. Not until hours later, when we were alone in his cabin and I brought it up. You hear what they said? He didn't look up from unlacing his boots. Which part? That I had a thing for you, he smirked, tossing the boot aside. Do you? I walked over and pushed his shoulder lightly. Don't get cocky, cowboy. But the truth was, yeah, I did. And I think he knew. As summer started to wind down, I began dreading the question that loomed over everything. What now? The ranch had been hiring for a permanent hand. That part wasn't new. Luke had mentioned it casually once, back when I first arrived. You ever think about putting down roots? He'd asked, throwing a shovel into the bed of the truck. Back then, I didn't have an answer. Now, I did. I just didn't know how to say it. One evening, I found Luke in the horse barn. He was brushing down one of the mares, sleeves rolled up, the muscles in his forearms flexing with each stroke. I stood there for a second, watching him, before finally speaking. I want to stay. He didn't stop brushing. You sure? Yeah. He glanced at me then, eyes searching mine. You know what that means, right? Yeah. You'd be giving up a lot. I don't have anything to go back to. He let the brush drop to his side. You sure it's not just about me? I stepped closer. Maybe it started that way, but it's more than that now. I like the work, the quiet, the space, and yeah, you. Luke didn't say anything right away, but the way he looked at me, like I'd just handed him something he didn't think he'd ever get, it made my throat tighten. You really want to stay? He said again, slower this time. I do. He nodded. Then stay. I exhaled, tension slipping out of my shoulders I hadn't realized I was holding. That night, we didn't talk much. We just lay in his bed, legs tangled, listening to the wind move through the trees. And somewhere in the silence, I felt it. That sense that maybe, just maybe, this could be the start of something real. But of course, nothing gold stays perfect. 2 days later, something happened. We were down by the creek, clearing debris from a fallen tree. One of the newer ranch hands, a guy named Clay, was working with us. Mid-20s. Cocky, the kind of guy who always had something to prove. I'd never liked him much, but I tolerated him. That day, though, he was in rare form. You two always work together, or what? He asked, tossing a branch onto the pile. You his favorite or something? I forced a chuckle. Guess I just know how to hold a shovel. Clay grinned. Sure. Or maybe you just know how to keep the boss real happy, huh? Something about the way he said it. Loud, pointed, with a smirk. Set my jaw tight. Before I could respond, Luke was already walking past me. Fast. Straight to Clay. You got something you want to say? He asked, his voice low and sharp like a whip crack. Clay's grin faltered. Just a joke, man. Yeah? Luke stepped closer. Then keep it to yourself. Clay mumbled something and turned away, but the damage was done. For the rest of the day, Luke barely spoke. When I went by his cabin that night, he didn't answer the door. I sat outside his cabin for a while that night, unsure if I should knock again. Clay's stupid comment had hit a nerve, and Luke's reaction made it clear. He was scared. Not of what we were, but of what it meant for everyone else to see it. The next morning, he was already out in the fields by the time I showed up. We didn't talk much. The silence between us felt heavier than usual. But by dusk, when the others had cleared out, I found him sitting on the fence line, staring out across the land. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The sky turned orange, the cicadas buzzed in the brush, and finally he said, I don't like feeling watched. I've lived my whole life making sure no one had anything to talk about. I nodded. I know, but I'm not a secret, Luke. I can't be. He looked at me then. Really looked. You think I don't want this? I think you're terrified it'll cost you something. He didn't answer, so I stood up. Then I'll go. If you want me to. He didn't stop me. But the next morning, before the sun even rose, I heard a knock on my bunkhouse door. Luke stood there, hat in hand, eyes tired. You're not a secret, he said, voice barely above a whisper. Not anymore. And just like that, the fear cracked. He didn't kiss me then, not with the others still sleeping, but he reached out, touched my shoulder like it meant something. Like I meant something. He told the crew later that week I was staying on full time. And when Clay made another joke, Luke didn't say a word. He just stood beside me, close enough that nobody could mistake where he stood. The ranch didn't just give me a job. It gave me something I didn't know I needed. A place, a purpose, and a cowboy who didn't offer me promises, just his truth. And that was enough.